Hey guys, this is Kevin, and for today's video I decided that I would talk for a few minutes about an aspect of Filipino culture that I really came to love and admire, and that is the emphasis on respect. If you move to the Philippines or if you visit there, you're going to find that Filipinos put a high value on respecting others, particularly in the way that they address people that they feel need to be addressed with some type of title. And I'll go into a little more detail to explain that. I'm not saying that there's no respect here in America or anything like that, but it is a little bit different here. And for example, I grew up here in the South, and I remember growing up that I was taught to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to those who were older than me. But then once you get into adulthood, the tendency is that when you are addressing other adults, you may just call them by their first names. You probably are not going to say yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, especially if someone is within your general age range. Maybe now I can think of if I were to see someone that I knew as a child that was much older than I, then I may address him as Mr. or something instead of by his first name. But anyway, you see what I'm saying. There's a tendency in America that once you cross the threshold into adulthood, whenever that is, there's not necessarily the expectation that you're going to address somebody as with yes sir or no sir or call them Mr. or Ms. That just kind of changes. Well, it's not that way in the Philippines. Filipinos are very conscientious about giving respect to either or addressing with respect someone who is either older than you or may deserve a title of respect for some other reason. So, for example, if you are in a college setting, I've worked in a college ministry for a long time. Most of the time, the students would address their professor with a sir or a ma'am on the front of their name. So let's just say you have a professor named John Smith. What they're likely to do is call him Sir John or Sir Smith, something like that. There's a tendency to put a sir or a ma'am in front of the name. And so you may find this happens to you if you visit the Philippines. They'll do the same with you. Or, for example, let's say you are interacting in some type of business situation and you notice how employers and employees deal with each other. If someone is your supervisor in the Philippines, there's the chances are you're not going to address him or her by the first name, and that's different. I remember when I had jobs here in the U.S., I usually addressed my supervisor just by his or her first name because even though he or she was my supervisor, that was acceptable. It doesn't really work that way in the Philippines. If you have a supervisor, let's say again the name is John, you're probably going to call him Sir John or maybe even Boss John. When my wife refers to her former boss back at the place she worked in Clark, she still calls him boss and then his name. It's just kind of a habit. And so it's a really neat thing. Another place that I noticed this, remember that I'm a pastor, and I noticed this kind of in the church setting. And it's in the church setting, it's kind of similar to what you would see here in the U.S. in predominantly African American congregations. If you go to a black church, they're probably not going to call the pastor by just his first name. They're going to call him pastor something or doctor reverend or something. They're not just going to call him by his first name. And it's the same way in the Philippines. As a pastor, they're probably going to call him, Pastor John or Pastor Kevin or something. They would be really uncomfortable not giving some type of title to address respect and to give respect and honor. And this, to me, it's just kind of a neat thing that you will notice. Now, another way that this plays out in Filipino relationships is Filipinos tend to have what I think in the term in sociology is fictive kin. Fictive kin. I guess that sounds better than fake relatives. But there's a tendency to, when you want to address someone respectfully, but also affectionately, in many cases, if he or she is older, you will either call him by brother or sister or aunt and uncle. You will give him those titles, even if you're not related. So, for example, when I was in the Philippines working with students, they tended to call me Kuya Kevin, Kuya meaning older brother. And to me, it was really neat because, again, the students would be uncomfortable addressing me as someone older than they were. They would be uncomfortable addressing me without giving me some kind of title. It would just put them in kind of an uncomfortable position. But by calling me Kuya, it allowed them to address me with respect, but it was also a bit familiar, so it wasn't like sir or something like that that can seem a little bit cold or distant. So you'll find that a lot of times within Filipino communities, and whether it's a church or just different families that know each other, if there is someone who is older than another person, then he or she will be addressed by kuya or ate, or maybe even tito or tita, which is uncle or aunt. And it's just, again, it's a way to give someone respect, but it's also kind of, there's an affectionate component in there, if you really think about it. So anyway, that's just something I've noticed, and that's something that you will notice, especially if you move to the Philippines and you really get into the culture and make a lot of Filipino friends, which I hope you would do. What will happen is there's a tendency that people that are younger than you, but especially if they're significantly younger than you, they're going to want to give you some type of title. And in many cases, especially if they're close to you, they'll give you a familial title. They'll call you kuya or they'll call you ate. And even here in the States, I have seen this in Filipino churches. If you have, let's say, an elder statesman of the church, they may call her ate something instead of just calling her by her first name. Same thing goes if you marry a Filipina. Her younger siblings may call you kuya, or they may call you tito, uncle. And it's just, again, it's just a way for them to be respectful, but at the same time be affectionate. So anyway, that's just something that I noticed about Filipino culture, and I think it's something that my Filipino viewers would agree with. And I think it's, like, pardon, like I said, it's something that to me was an aspect of life in the Philippines that I really enjoyed in terms of interpersonal relationships. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. Hope you learned something. I'll try to make another one soon.